All right, and welcome back to another podcast. This time, another unscripted one. I've been really struggling to think of a topic, and I've also not had a lot of time to actually record something like this. So I found some time, and then I had to find a topic, and I was really sort of brainstorming and trying to think of things. I need to come up with a list of topics to cover on this particular podcast, but I did finally come up with something. It's something that came up in one of my previous videos. It is why play old video games. And like I said, I haven't scripted this at all, so this is just going to be like my wild thoughts. I haven't had a lot of time to think about it other than I did whenever I was playing that video and also when I saw that comment. As I mentioned in that video, which I think is my Donkey Kong Country review of the original game. In that review, I mentioned that I received a comment on one of my Let's Play shorts about somebody asking, why play old games? Why not play things that are new? And I'm going to start by saying some of the things that I said in those comments whenever I responded to this person. And I was not mean-spirited about it because, if they want to play new games, that's entirely up to them. That's personal preference. But the reason that I play old games is because, well, first reason is probably because I'm old. I mean, those are the games I grew up with. I'm very attached to them, and there's a lot of nostalgia involved in them. They take me back to my childhood. And the older I get, there are less things that exist that can do that I enjoy doing. And I think that video games is a fantastic medium to explore for nostalgia because they are in some ways time capsules, but in other ways timeless. It really depends on the game. Like, for instance, if I'm feeling nostalgia for the 90s, I might play something like Sonic the Hedgehog because Sonic the Hedgehog is just covered in the 90s. Like, you have the character that is just built around the 90s dude, as they called it. And he's just really the epitome of all things 90s in a lot of ways. He's got, the cool shoes, and he's got like the attitude and all that sort of stuff. The music is very 90s feeling. But if I want to play something that's classic but also, timeless, I might shoot over to Super Mario Brothers 3. But one of the main reasons I play old games is because they connect me to a time and a place. I'll give some examples. I've already mentioned Donkey Kong Country 2 takes me back to my childhood, and specifically to my time with my brother, who passed away when I was 13. Donkey Kong Country takes me back to the time before my brother passed away, when he and I were first starting to get into playing video games. He was always a little bit better at video games than I was, even at a young age. I relied on him a lot to get through stages and things. And Donkey Kong's format of two-player co-op was sort of perfectly tailored for us to share the load of getting through levels. And I just really enjoyed the time that I spent with my brother playing those games. Sonic 2 is another example of a game that we played a lot together. He had a Genesis and I had a Super Nintendo, so Sonic 2 was sort of our main Genesis game. Another game that is very nostalgic for that period of my life is Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for the Genesis. It was a fighting game that had Street Fighter controls. Of course, he and I were so young, we didn't really know what Street Fighter controls were, so we just would go in and mash buttons until we destroyed one another. Or we'd play the single player mode. My brother was a huge Power Rangers fan. I was sort of, they didn't annoy me, but I wasn't like a big fan like he was, but I enjoyed reveling in his fandom. And so he just, he had all the toys, he had all the games, he had all sorts of Power Ranger stuff. And so because it was a two-player fighting game, he always wanted to play, and he almost always beat the crap out of me, which as an older brother is, a black mark, I guess. But I enjoyed it nonetheless, and I always think of my childhood when I think of Power Rangers. Then, you know, growing up, I didn't play as many video games. I think about playing in college, or excuse me, in high school. I played a lot of ATV Off-Road Fury 2 for the PlayStation 2. I played that game a lot, and I could still think about being out in the desert and putting on the song "Them Bones" by Audio. No, not Audio Slave. That's the band they became. Oh, what's the name of the band? I can't remember. If you remember the name of the band, then let me know. I've never been very good at that sort of thing. I love the music, I love the songs, but like the bands escape me. It's the guy who became the lead singer of Audio Slave. He was the lead singer of this other band before they broke up. Um, but I just would ride out in the desert on those levels. You could run into the barriers and it would throw the ATVs like a mile. It was awesome. Other games I played in high school, that was a later high school game. Earlier in high school, I had a PlayStation 1 and an N64, like middle school, high school. And when I had my N64, I played Super Mario 64 constantly. And for two reasons. One, it is the best 3D platforming game ever. You can throw nostalgia out the window. I have never played a 3D platforming game that makes me feel the way Mario 64 does. And I will pull it down still today and play through it as, you know, because it just holds up. I mean, I know the visuals are like, ugh, but you know, at the time they were kind of amazing. But nowadays, you know, I fully get that. You know, it's not the best visuals from the N64. Although I would put out there that Super Mario 64's visuals, despite being kind of chunky with a lot of triangles, because of how the N64 rendered the hardware, at least it doesn't have the telltale fog that the N64 often was plagued with. The games were sort of designed with the limitations of the N64 hardware in mind, and so like there's not a lot of pop-up, there's not a lot of fog. The game just presents itself in a very fabulous fashion. Surprisingly, I didn't have Ocarina of Time growing up, so I didn't really play that. The only two games I had for the longest time for the N64 was that game, and then I had Cruising USA. And I had one of those special controllers with a knob on the end where you can like steer it with the steering wheel. And I used that controller so much that I actually wore down the parts where you hold it. So like my fingers had like permanent indentations in the foam. Because I played that game a lot. I even tried to play Mario 64 with it a couple times just because it was the only two games I had forever for the N64. I had a PlayStation, and I had a lot more games for the PlayStation because my cousins had games for PlayStation. And when they got tired of those games, they would bring them over to me and let me have them. And so the very first RPG I ever played that sort of set the trend for RPGs for me was Xenogears. And that's not a lot of people's first RPG, but it was mine. And I just loved that game. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Played it multiple times, but I never beat it because the second disc of my copy did not work. You could put it in, it would never boot past the original sort of, like if you had an old PlayStation game that was damaged, it would boot to the black screen, but not to the white screen. I think that's how it worked. Like you know, the PlayStation had two boot screens. It had like the black screen and then it had the white screen. And this one would boot to the black screen and then it would just sit there and it would not do anything else. And so for decades, I never beat that game. I didn't beat that game until after I was married. I picked up a copy for the digital store for the PSP that I had. And I beat it then on the PSP. And you want to talk about a disappointing experience. Because I remember loving that game when I was in high school. And just wishing I'd pop that disc in and I'd play through the first disc over and over again because I just couldn't get any further. But I remember getting to the second disc in, you know, on the PSP, booting it up, playing the game, and like immediately being disappointed and after playing through the first disc on the PSP and being like, wow, this is just as great as I remember. And so there's that. I also had Gex, which I don't remember all that fondly because it was terrible. Especially compared to Mario 64. It was the 3D Gex. I don't remember the name of it. But that was my 3D platformer on the PlayStation. And it was not, well, terrible's not doing it justice. I played it a good bit. but I never attached to it like I did Mario 64, and I would be playing it thinking, why am I not just playing Mario 64 again? Man, Mario 64, I had to go back on myself, but I remember 100%ing that game. It was the first game that I ever 100%ed, because I only had the two games, and Cruising USA, you just raced, and I did beat Cruising USA several times, but Mario 64, you could beat the game, and there was just more to do. And I remember very clearly sitting in my little room with my Magnavox. I had a black Magnavox television that I had all the way up to college. Whenever my apartment got struck by lightning and it killed it, but I had this black Magnavox television, and I remember playing Mario 64 in that room and finally getting all 120 stars and rocketing up to the roof and meeting Yoshi and getting all those lives, but then thinking, wow, this is great, but there's nothing left to do. So it was a really hollow prize. And I remember saving and quitting and loading the game later, and all the lives were gone. And I was like, what the crap? So it's not a great completion bonus, I guess, but it's a fabulous game. So that makes me think about high school. It makes me think about, being in my room and playing games on my little TV that I had. Lots of fun. And then in college, that's whenever I met some people who sort of broadened my horizons on games. Like, they introduced me to a lot more games than I had played before. I rented Final Fantasy X on a weekend in college, and didn't return it for so long that gave up on me bringing it back. And that game, to go from Xenogears to Final Fantasy X as your first two RPGs, it's a real big step. I'm not saying that Final Fantasy X is harder than Xenogears. I'm just saying it is very different. And so I played Final Fantasy X. I really enjoyed it. And then I got my first gaming magazine, and that gaming magazine had an advertisement for Kingdom Hearts. And I was like, oh wow, my family is big Disney fans. We would go to Disney every year when I was a child. My parents had a timeshare there, and so we'd go down to Disney every year and spend time there. And so, you had this game that was a mixture of, at the time, two of my favorite things, Final Fantasy and Disney. I was like, wow, this is great, because I had went back and played the older Final Fantasy games. A buddy of mine had them, and so I borrowed them from him and played 7, I played 8, I played 9. I tried to play 6 and 5, but at the time I was in college, and I didn't really have time to. I had already played a lot of RPGs. I need to get back to schoolwork. My buddy had a GameCube, and I didn't have a GameCube. So one week, he wanted to play all my PlayStation games, and I wanted to play all his GameCube games. And so we swapped for 2 months, and he beat my entire library, and I beat his entire library. And so that's how I played Metroid Prime, which, wow, Metroid Prime is an amazing game. And I'll think about playing Prime in college all the time. And Wind Waker, oh my gosh, I fell in love with Wind Waker. Wind Waker's probably one of my favorite games ever made, but the reasons for it I'll come back to. So that was college. I played a lot of video games, kind of experimented in genres, and broadened my horizons for gaming. And then my apartment got struck by lightning, and it killed my NES, it killed my Super Nintendo, it killed my N64, it killed my PlayStation and my PlayStation 2. No, it didn't kill my PlayStation. I still have my PlayStation, but it killed my PlayStation 2. And I was a broke college kid, so the only console that I had the money to replace was the PlayStation. And my copy of Kingdom Hearts was stuck in it. So I pulled my PlayStation part, pulled Kingdom Hearts out, and then went and traded a lot of my old games at GameStop so that I could afford to buy another PlayStation 2. And part of me regrets that because I had some awesome games that I sold because I just didn't have the money to keep them and keep playing Kingdom Hearts. And at the time I was pretty short-sighted and focused on that, but if I had not done that, I wouldn't have had any game console for a while, so I don't really know how I feel about it, even to this day. Then I got married, and I sort of was like, I'm an adult now, I don't need video games, but, so I kind of got rid of some stuff. But then my wife was pregnant with our first child, and she got us a hotel room because we were both just frazzled. We needed a break because I was working, and she was pregnant and working, and we were just like, oof. So she got us a hotel room. And in the hotel room, they had a GameCube system hooked up to a network thing. I don't know how it worked. And they had Super Mario Sunshine. And so Super Mario Sunshine got me back into gaming. After that trip to that hotel, I went and bought a GameCube, and then took that GameCube home, hooked it up, and I got Wind Waker. I got a whole bunch of games for it. I got Luigi's Mansion, just a whole bunch of games that like I've become very nostalgic of because I played them with my children when they were small, and it was just a lot of fun growing up with those games with my kids. So I can give you an example going back to playing Wind Waker. So when my daughter was born, I was working a swing shift at a factory, and that factory I'd work 2 weeks days and 2 weeks nights. It was the first job I had out of college. I was working in a laboratory at a factory, and at that factory, during the days I would work days, I would stay up all night. Or excuse me, during the days that I worked nights that I had off, like so. At night, I would work 3 days a week, then I worked 4 days a week. But the rest of the days of the week, rather than try to turn around in the middle of the week, I would just stay up all night, even on the days I was off. That worked out really well for me and my wife because we had a newborn. Every night, my wife would sleep, and I'd put our daughter on one of those boppy pillows, and she would sleep with me, and I would stay awake. And, it's hours till dawn. There's nothing to watch on television. So I would play Wind Waker every night while she slept. And like I just played and played and played the dog out of that game. I pretty much 100%ed it on the GameCube. Like I went figurine hunting every night whenever I got done playing like the bulk of the main game. And like I had everything like fully kitted out, and I love that game, and I love it because of that time in my life, and it always takes me back to sitting on that little couch in our little home, holding that baby in my lap, and just playing video games all night. It was just such a sometimes I wish I could go back there. And I guess that's what all these games are about, is wanting to go back even just for a little while and experience a time that's just not there anymore. My son, it was Kingdom Hearts 2. My son was born in 2008. Kingdom Hearts 2 was a couple of years old, but I had not had a PlayStation 2 in a while. And so I had bought a PlayStation 2, and my wife bought me one for Christmas. So I had two PlayStation 2s all of a sudden. So I set one up in the bedroom, and I set one up in the living room. And my birthday present in the bedroom, and then the one I had bought, I put in the living room. And so we played a lot of Kingdom Hearts. My son didn't sleep very well, but one day we found that the menu was playing, that little dun, 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 little track that plays at the menu screen. And when it would come on, he would sleep. There was something sort of almost magical about that music. And I had the soundtrack on CD, so I put it on I ripped the sound and put it on our phones. I put it on anything I could find that would play music, like burned CDs and stuff. And in every room we had that song where we could loop it over and over again. And we slept to that song for probably 2 or 3 years. And it saved our lives, really, because he just would not sleep at all without something playing. And that was his favorite piece of music. So Kingdom Hearts 2, I always think about playing with my son whenever he was really small. And then, just all kinds of memories tied to these games. And I'll have memories tied to new games that I play as well that I'll hold on to for decades, I'm sure. But memory is a very powerful sensory experience. Like, memories are triggered by sound and sight and touch and feel. And, the older I get, the more I value my memories. And so anything that can connect me to them is something really powerful. So one of the reasons I play old video games is because of the nostalgia, yes. But another reason I play it is because, as I said in a video on my Don't Come Country 2 review, they connect me to a time and a place that is not easily accessible to me anymore, not readily available. And I can use them to sort of transport myself to a time and a place. It is escapism, and that's fine. Escapism is part of the reasons that we read books or watch movies or play video games, is to escape for a little while the reality of our circumstances. I think that escapism is a powerful tool. I think it was C.S. Lewis that said that it's the job of every soldier to escape. And no, it was Tolkien. Tolkien said that. It was the job of every good soldier to escape. And so I have to double check that. It was one of those two men. We should see it as our duty, our privilege to escape through media as we can, in order to, make our lives more rich. So I think that that's one of the reasons I play old video games, is that it's a form of escapism for me, that I use to renew myself. So nostalgia, escapism aside, I also just find that old video games are just good. Not all of them, obviously. There are a lot of bad old games, in the sense that there are a lot of new bad games. But when you find one that's good, I mean, what's the point of not playing it again if you really enjoyed it? If that experience brought you a lot of value, and you enjoyed that story, it's like rereading a good book. I mean, why wouldn't you want to reread a good book? Whereas maybe I'm just out of my depth anyway, because I'm the sort of person, I'd rather read the book than watch the movie. And so, you know, I think that what I really like about the medium of video games is it's like a combination of my two favorite things, of storytelling and also just like visual, stimulus, and also just the ability to like interact with it in like a personal way, to kind of shape it in my own way. All these things come together to make something that I really enjoy doing. So yeah, I play old video games for nostalgia. I also play them for escapism. I play them because I enjoy them. Like Chrono Trigger, for example. I didn't play Chrono Trigger growing up. I just didn't have it. But like when I first played Chrono Trigger, I thought this is one of the best games ever made. And since then, I have replayed it many times because it's just a fabulous game. It's just timeless in its, build and presentation, and ability to transport you to another place. And I really like the art. I like the aesthetic. I like the gameplay. I like the graphics. I like everything about that game. And I wouldn't remake it. I mean, I know people talk about remaking games, and I wouldn't be. If they made a remake, I'd probably buy it and play it. But at the same time, I don't really need a remake. This the Final Fantasy VII remake. People ask me all the time if I've played it, and whenever I'm in the mood for Final Fantasy VII, I just go play the original because the graphics don't bother me. Like that's a non-factor for me, is the presentation. I still think that they hold up fairly well. I mean, I know they're blocky, and some people might say they're kind of ugly, but like I have the same ability now that I had then to imagine them as something greater than they are. And they still invoke like a certain style and aesthetic that's, to me, artistic. So I don't think that old games lose that aesthetic. So, and now with hacking, you can breathe new life into an old game. So like for now, I downloaded a hack for Super Metroid. Super Metroid's another game that I think is just a seminal classic. I've played it a lot, and I downloaded this patch that has heavier gravity, so it plays and feels a lot more like Zero Mission and Metroid Fusion, which I also really enjoy. And I'm just getting to like re-experience this game in a new way that I haven't gotten before. Things like randomizers are interesting to me, because you have a game that you've played a lot growing up. Maybe you want to have a new taste of it, a new style of it. And I think that those games are perennial in that sense, that they can provide that on their own, but like anything you can add to the experience to keep that game evergreen is really cool. I just think it's a cool concept in general. But that's sort of my take on why we play old games, why old games are still valuable, why they're important. Thank you for listening to this podcast on why I still play old games. And I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you will stick around and maybe for future podcasts and enjoy just talking about these topics with me. But if you do like this content, leave a like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. I hope that you have an awesome day.